Okay, so here's what I'm thinking, Jim. Yeah, Bob, we're just about out of young adult novels that we can adapt into movies to get that sweet, sweet Twilight and Twilight imitator money. All this to say, I think it's high time we start getting more creative with the way we make not creative movies. Okay, how about one of them whatchamacallums, the manga? Like them Japan people, but they're like white instead and they're fighting. Like Power Rangers? Nah, not Power Rangers. It's like a cartoon. It's like that Animatrix. Oh, like that Japanimation. That's it, Japanimation, the Speed Racer. Yeah, I remember I had to watch one of them with my daughter way back. That one of the in Russia. There's another one when she was in high school and still wearing all that goth shit. I mean, I love her. She's my own flesh and blood. But yeah, if I had to spend another day doing any of that crap, I'd probably goddamn killed myself. Oh yeah, I know, Bob. I got one too. Anyway, it was actually it was pretty good. It was that Death Book or the Death Man. Oh yeah, I know that one. They're none of them. They're flashbangs or electrocution-y type things. Yeah, it'll be way easier than that. They're Pokeball.gxe. Yeah, let's do it. Yeah, all right. So I have a pretty entry-level experience with anime, much like I do with most TV, to be completely honest with you. When I say that, I mean I've touched very few shows, and the number that I've actually finished is even more pitiful than that. Even if I thoroughly enjoy something that I've seen the first few episodes of, like Breaking Bad, or Ozark, or JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, or even One Punch Man, I don't follow through on a lot of shit. Now, luckily I'm here today to talk about one of the exceptions to this rule, The Office. The best anime. It's Death Note. I mean, you obviously read the title to this video. It's obviously Death Note. Now, memes aside, I do love me some Death Note. It's probably some of the most fun I've ever had watching anything serialized to any extent. I love the concept, I like its over-the-top gothic style, even when it gets pretty cornball.
I'll take a potato chip and eat it.
I really dig the voice talent and some of the writing. Most of all, I like the deviation from other shows like it with its mind game premise. The cat and mouse dynamic between honor student sociopath Light Yagami and the socially aloof world-class detective L. Two young ideologues who influence the world around them like a giant chessboard. Light stumbles upon a Death Note, an ominous notebook used by gods of death. Ryuk, who had thrown it into the human world out of boredom, tracks Light down, only to discover he has ambitions of becoming god of the new world. He eventually takes on the alias Kira, and we follow him as he extracts vengeance on criminals, evades policemen, including his own father, negotiates to work with a copycat killer slash forced lover Misa, and, of course, tries to learn the identity of his arch-nemesis L, so he can put his name in the Death Note and eliminate him for good. Instead of a couple of burly men shooting energy blasts at each other and killing each other by poking various pressure points on each other's body, you had a couple nerds. Two egotistical nerds. It's good shit. So as a fan, when I heard that there was going to be a live-action Death Note movie, I was cautiously optimistic. More cautious than optimistic, I'll admit. I kept up to date with the various director choices and other pre-production developments, as much as I could anyway, as much as Wikipedia would give me, when it was still just an idea and not so much a thing that was going to happen. And then at last the first trailer dropped, along with most of my expectations.
Do you think that I'm crazy?
I think you're not crazy enough. We could change the world.
The killer has taken credit for over 400 deaths. Although we do not know how he kills his victims, we do know he's not some omnipotent force. He's a person, like you or me.
This movie's about what happens when you give the ultimate power to a teenager.
Adam said, I just want to make the most kick-ass version of a movie with a kid with a killer notebook.
Okay, so the show might be good.
It's got a lot of things going on and appeals to a bunch of different demographics of consumers, but I think I speak for everyone here when I say there's not nearly enough emphasis on the high school element. I mean, how are these kids gonna relate to it unless the protagonist is so obviously in high school? I mean, we all know how kids are. If you set your story anywhere outside of high school, they get, you know, a little, "Mom, Dad, this is a gram I most obviously cannot insta." Okay, now that I got that obvious joke out of the way, I want to clear the air on just one thing, because I think it's really important that you address this sort of thing before you review any kind of adaptation. When it comes to translating any kind of media into a movie, at least for me personally, things are allowed to be different. One of my biggest burning hot pet peeves in anything, really, is how possessive these fan persons get when their show or comic book or video game or book is getting the big screen treatment. Especially book people.
God damn it, you're the reason I don't read.
He's not supposed to say that line until much later in the narrative.
He's sitting differently than he did in the original comic. Why is he blonde? Why isn't she blonde? They're white! He's black.
Alright everyone, now for the big one. It's not in Japan! Arbitrary changes like that, at least for the most part, don't really bug me when it comes to adaptations. And those with a wide enough palette for movies can tell you that just because something is different from the source material doesn't mean it can't be a good standalone work. Take The Warriors, for example. I haven't read the original novel, and if I keep going at the rate that I'm currently going, I probably never will. But most sources indicate that that movie is barely relevant to that original story. Yet, if you don't know this going in and just take it on its own terms, it's pretty great. I mean, it's a cult classic for a reason. It's shot in a very interesting way, the dialogue's got a lot of kick to it, the action's choreographed and edited smoothly and coherently, and it's probably one of the most quoted movies of all time. Can you dig it? And then you got one of the big ones, like The Godfather. A good chunk of the people who've both read the book and seen the movie pretty much agree that the movie is the definitive way to experience Mario Puzo's original story.
But you know that this is a greater movie than it is a book.
Well, that goes without saying. When we come back...
I said it.
Well, then you said it, okay.
And I'll say this with 100% certainty, you will not find a single person on this planet who misses the arc from the original Jaws novel, where Hooper tries to bone Chief Brody's wife. I was 12. I was 12 when I read that. I felt bad that I'd never read the book version of a movie that I wanted to see before I saw the movie, because, you know, I guess we were in a post-Harry Potter landscape where apparently the way you gauge whether or not a movie is good is how faithful it is to the book. So I put my money where my mouth is. And yeah, there's this drawn-out, graphically detailed account of an affair between one of the main characters and another main character's wife. Oh, also, most of the characters were drawn kind of as assholes, to the point where Spielberg himself was like, yeah, I mean, it's a solid narrative, but I kind of wanted the shark to win at the end. So let's maybe change that. I was 12. Now, with all that on the table, I will say, having watched Death Note twice, I kind of relate to those people who complain about those changes, more so than I usually do. Rather than merely sympathizing with negative reviews of stuff like The Last Airbender or Dragon Ball Evolution, 'twas I, with my mouth agape, asking why we're still here.
Why are we still here? Just to suffer.
And while I'm reasonable enough to say that it's probably not as bad as those two particular adaptations, there were so many things in this movie that disappointed me, not just as a fan of Death Note, but as a fan of good movies. From the first few scenes alone, you can pretty much see a lot of the problems I have with this film. Things move at a breakneck speed, important character development is relegated to a couple of lines or looks in a character's eye, yet there's still a need to cram in not at all subtle nods to the original property. We establish Light and the power of the Death Note in conjunction with one another, throwing us into this reimagined mythos before we have time to chew on the details and comprehend Light's personality and motivations. A similar thing happens to most of the major characters throughout the movie, which is a real problem for someone like L, who not only retains a lot of his little isms from the anime, but also has several new ones, like a regulated sleep cycle and an underlying nervous tic. And I can't stress this enough, it's not the changes themselves that bug me. It's the fact that the new stuff and the old stuff are colliding with each other so much that you often don't have time or the clarity needed to register why these characters are the way they are and why it's important to the story. To get a little more specific, one of the best sequences for me happens early in the movie and is ironically one of the token moments where the changes actually improve on the original story. We're properly introduced to Mia in this case, but we learn Cher's Light's frustration with the injustices of the world, and a simultaneously sweet and unnerving relationship starts to bloom out of their global assault on the world's worst criminals. The lead into this is really cool. It's like a Judd Apatow Diablo Cody hybrid. A good chunk of the sequence covers the moral complexities of the story that are so needed to make it Death Note, but it's there. It's here. And the whole thing's wrapped in this neo-noir kind of atmosphere with lots of complementary lights, some really gorgeous cinematography, and some smooth editing that doesn't feel like crowded or rushed. It actually has a sense of momentum and purpose. Finally, we're at a part of the movie that doesn't feel like thrown together young adult schlock. It actually starts to take on its own identity as an adaptation. And just when it seems like they're gonna go all the way with these divergences and create something that's fresh and, you know, warranted, problems come careening back into the film like a pickup truck full of hentai and body pillows. I tried with that one. And as any fan of Death Note will probably tell you, it is both high praise and a major concern when I say to you, unironically, filmmakers, that Misa Misa was one of the most well-handled parts of your Death Note adaptation. Yikes. As for the protagonist, you know, the most important part of the story you could possibly have, the best way to sum up the differences between the original Light Yagami and Light Turner, as portrayed by Nat Wolff. Wait, what the fuck, that Nat Wolff? Just take a look at the different ways they're introduced to Ryuk and the powers of the Death Note.
You've taken quite a liking to it. No reason to act surprised. I am the Shinigami Ryuk. That used to be my notebook. The god of death, huh? Well, I'm not surprised. So what'll happen to me? You're here to take my soul, right? Huh? What do you mean?
Now, if we're gonna make a successful populist piece of entertainment, we have to look at our most successful peers as an example. People who successfully made a lucrative version of something really cool. What is everyone's favorite part of Michael Bay's Transformers movies? It's something that truly eludes me. It can't be the robots. Why else would they be in there for so little? Billions of dollars these made, and I have no idea why they're so— Oh, that's right, Shia LaBeouf! Shia LaBeouf running back and forth saying, Optimus! 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 Let's just take that cocktail of adrenaline and hormones and harness its powers into a individual character. I think that'll make the fans happy.
It was only if you took the book, and I thought I could convince you not to take it.
Are you kidding me?
You put my name in the book, I got mad, I'm taking it. You said you loved me, I thought you wouldn't take the book!
But don't worry, we'll work in the sociopathic super genius stuff into the story somewhere. Probably the end. Keep people happy. The stuff with Mia and Light is immediately followed by the introduction of L, which shows a lot of promise. The thing about L is he's kind of like half the draw of the original property, and he's built up as like this almost mythical entity who's like cracked some of the world's top cases, but aside from just walking around being like, oh, I knew he'd say that, oh, well, if that were the case, then I'd already be dead, or oh, I know who he is because I'm also this way. Like, instead of really focusing on that and letting that simmer, letting us understand, oh wow, these are two sides of the same coin, it all kind of amounts to, here's L, he's the shit. Now let's get to the technical stuff. From what I've seen of Adam Wingard's work, he's a pretty talented filmmaker. I've seen You're Next and The Guest. The guy's a good filmmaker. He quite passionately wears his influences on his sleeve while still kind of giving things a contemporary edge. And like those two other films, the thrillery parts of the Death Note movie have traces of John Carpenter, while the mono and mono stuff between L and Light is something out of a Michael Mann flick. That stuff in that diner, for example, when they're finally meeting each other face to face and have more or less a battle of wits, it's like Heat. bad heat, or a guy with about as much composure as a baddie of the week on Law & Order somehow escapes that confrontation without being caught by the quote-unquote world-class detective. See, it's muddy. For every cool thing, there's like two not cool things. He finds ways to bring that cool 80s aesthetic to the 21st century, which just makes it suck even harder when it feels like post-Twilight, edgy teenager bullshit. Which, to be 100% fair, that's not to say the original Death Note wasn't edgy. At the end of the day, the original Death Note and this adaptation, they're aimed at more or less the same crowd. But just because the movie's being marketed towards the same demographic, just because you could find stuff from the anime and the movie at your local Hot Topic, that doesn't mean that the trappings aren't different and can't be compared. Because they can be. I'm gonna do it right now. The anime's got a slick, pretty well animated mind game set to creepy operatic music and electro tones. The movie's got 80s pop hits over shots that you could easily compare to a music video. The anime's got painfully long monologues and melodramatic poses. The movie's got awkward banter between 20-somethings playing teenagers and Dutch angles that zoom. The anime's got lean, long-haired emo kids. The movie's got... I shouldn't. I really shouldn't. Nah, fuck it, I'm gonna do it anyway.
Okay. Relax, Lily. You're asleep. You're sleeping.
Anti-Semitic, white supremacist, hateful.
I think what I'm trying to get at here is that the movie spends way too much time and energy trying to be like a reimagined Death Note.
The movie has an edge. I feel like people are gonna respond to it.
We had a little bit more creative license to follow Adam's true vision and make it more of a dark, edgier Death Note.
Now, parts of the movie are good, even if they're just parts. The set design can evoke a existential, kind of eerie atmosphere, even though literally all the sets feel like they take place in a giant box. Yes, even the outdoor parts. None of the actors are particularly bad in the movie. If there's any cringy moments at all, it's mostly due to the writing. The leads have charisma, the romantic subplot has some chemistry. There are some admittedly funny parts where the characters start to break down, mostly Light. He starts freaking out that they're gonna get caught, and he's starting to compromise some of his own beliefs, and even if it is that Shia stuff that I talked about a little earlier, it's like, I don't know. Even if I'm not sure if the reason I'm laughing is good or not, like, I was at least laughing. It was entertaining on that front. So with this in mind, it's worth mentioning that one of my absolute favorite scenes is a foot chase that happens between Elle and Light towards the end. You know, when all bets are off and it's finally just turning into a straight action movie. They really crank up that 80s stuff, like the lights, the red and blue lights that, you know, Death Note, red and blue, Death Note. Like, it's so cool, it's so, like, blood pumping, and yet at the same time, it couldn't be any less Death Note. You got these two underdeveloped, scrawny losers just chasing each other through these buildings. Elle's like trying to do that Tom Cruise run even though they're not framing him well enough for that to work. Maybe that was intentional. Never mind the fact that he's barely even Elle at this point, but goddamn, he's like trying to slide over cars and shit and he doesn't have to do that. I think my favorite part, I was like viscerally reacting to this too. It gets to a point where they're so desperate to either get away or catch Kira that Light starts pushing people over almost to say, oh, look at this desperate lunatic. He doesn't care about anyone but himself. But then Elle comes in and he starts pushing fucks over. I was rolling around on the ground just saying, stop pushing people, stop pushing people. All this happening with this electro beat underneath. I gotta say, the music is fire. Like, the score's super cool. I like what they were trying to do with it. I think it's fitting of the direction they were obviously trying to take. It was memorable and it got me more invested into the movie had it not been in there. Anyway, let's address one of the bigger parts of the movie that I surprisingly haven't really touched on that much. Willem Dafoe. Willem Dafoe as Ryuk is honestly one of the best casting choices for something like this I've ever seen. I'd go as far to say it's about as inspired as casting Ron Perlman as Hellboy. The voice, the cadence, the delivery, the design and performance of Ryuk is pretty good.
Rule 28. Each death must be physically possible, so no shark attacks while someone's on the toilet. As much as I love that idea.
But to continue that pattern of one cool thing with 2 or 3 not cool things, the way they use Ryuk in this story is one of the biggest problems I have with this movie. In the show, he's kind of there as a chorus, there to be a neutral party who mirrors the experience of the audience, only occasionally intervening to help light, usually out of some selfish reason, like jonesing on apples. Oh, don't get me started on the apples, that's probably like the most obnoxious callback to the show that the movie has to offer.
It's inconvenient. That's the flaw with the Death Note. Light is usually so calm, but he's snapped. This must be getting to him.
Now, in the movie, it's established from the big reveal at the beginning that he's the instigator of the whole thing. Rather than dropping the Death Note into the real world and letting whatever happen happen, which in the context of the original story just emphasizes how batshit crazy it is that Kira was the one that picked it up.
Now we could, in this dream of yours, take care of a situation like this. We just put Kenny's name down and see what happens.
They make him this demonic would-be mentor who basically coaxes and seduces Light into using the book in the first place. Of course, not all the way though, because he's still got to do that thing where he's off to the side laughing like he did in the show, right? Right? Like in the show.
Humans are so interesting.
But in this one, he's also a key part in making sure the deaths written in the note happen in the first place. So he's also the deliverance of said justice. But what is justice, you know? After all, his loyalty only seems to go to the highest bidder or whoever entertains him the most personality-wise. Yeah, but also
Ferris wheel powers.
the execution of this one character is just this unfocused mess. He's Ryuk, but he's also Frank the Rabbit, but he's also the devil from Faust, but he's also the Green Goblin.
Out am I?
So really, there's a lot I could say about this movie, specifically about the potential directions it could have taken had they really gone balls to the wall with trying to reimagine it as something that could stand on its own, but I'm gonna leave it at this for now. The Netflix original production of Death Note is not a very good movie. Now, had Death Note never existed, had this been its own thing that wasn't based off of a, pre-existing property, it would be passable enough as like a creepy, gothic teen thriller with some horror elements mixed in. But unfortunately, Death Note does already exist, and in a form that was so effective and such a massive hit that Hollywood tried to Americanize it. Now, it's super easy to just unload on someone for doing a poor adaptation, especially of something you really like, so as mad as I am about this movie, I want to reiterate that it definitely could have been worse than it was. I remember seeing Elle in the trailer in particular and just being like, that could go either way. And sure, while the filmmakers might have tried a little too hard to make him quirky with his residual candy-eating habits from the original, that sleepy goggle thing, and what I can only describe as him going postal at the end. But when that mask that makes it oh so difficult to connect with him on a human level, especially when he's speaking, comes off of his face and he's just allowed to breathe as a character, to express his emotions and his motives to the audience, I gotta say, he's probably the strongest presence in the film. You know, that isn't a scary 10-foot-tall death god.
Teenagers are most susceptible to ideology. Most people decide whether they're on the right, the left, the black, the blue, the good guys, the bad guys during their formative years, where they find themselves, where they feel they're the most unique individuals in the universe.
So at least as far as Lakeith Stanfield's performance goes, it was a reasonable, believable, solidly acted interpretation of the character. Even if it's not necessarily the best one that could ever be. That would be me.